So, what did moving to Brazil cost me? Now, I'm not talking financially because it's not about how much did the flights cost, how much did the shipping container cost, how much was it to get your visas sorted and all the paperwork and everything like that. They're kind of the easy parts. You just pay money and they get done and things move forward. I'm really talking about what Brazil cost me personally. It cost me also a sacrifice. It cost me the career that I'd been building up until the point I moved. Because before moving to Brazil, I was in London and I'd studied fashion photography at London College of Fashion, and I'd been working for years for Mario Testino. I don't know if anybody would actually know who he is, but I was traveling all over the world with him. I wasn't famous. I wasn't super successful. I wasn't shooting the Vogue covers myself, but I was learning from one of the best photographers in the world. And my career was on the up. It was on the up. I was getting opportunities. And for years, I was working towards that for years, and I had momentum. And then my wife, obviously, she wanted to move back to Brazil to have kids near her family. So we packed everything into a shipping container, all my pro photo gear, all my studio gear, everything into a container and off to Brazil. Now, that in itself is quite interesting when you move to Brazil, because you can get in with your visa for a certain amount of time, all the things you're moving with without paying tax on. Because if you're trying to bring stuff into Brazil, there is a huge tax. So when I travelled with all my cameras, like 2 or 3 bodies, like 6 or 7 lenses in my bag, a laptop, everything, I arrived in Belo Horizonte airport and they kept me for like an hour. And I think my wife was outside waiting for me to arrive, and they just kept me in there, and they were like, had everything out, and they were looking on the computers and they were saying, this is going to cost you this much, this is going to cost you this much. You have to pay taxes coming in. I was like, no, I'm coming in for the first time on my visa. I don't have to pay these taxes. No, you do. You're going to have to pay all the taxes for all this expensive photography equipment. And luckily, my wife had printed off the piece of paper from the government website saying, if it's your first entrance to the country on your visa, you can bring things for your professional career tax-free. But I couldn't find the paper anywhere. And it was over an hour of them billing everything up, telling me how much I owe. And I finally found this piece of paper folded up in the bottom of my bag. And I was like, no, here it is. Look. Obviously not speaking Portuguese. And they were like, oh, okay, yeah, that's fine. You go. And they just let me pack everything up, and that was it. Where was I in my story? And I genuinely believed I would just continue my career here in Brazil. But then about 2 weeks after I arrived, I got an email from the Telegraph magazine, and I'd been recommended. They'd seen a story I did a while ago, and they wanted me to shoot a story for one of their magazine issues. And that is the thing I'd been working towards for years and years and years. This was the highest point I'd ever reached. I should have been celebrating. I had to say no, because the job was unpaid, obviously, which a lot of photography jobs is, and I just spent all my money moving to Brazil. I couldn't afford a return flight to London and then somewhere to stay and all my food and everything like that. 2 weeks after spending all my money to come to Brazil. And then a week later, it happened again. Another magazine I dreamt of shooting for emailed me saying, am I interested in shooting a story for them? And I had to say no. And it was at that moment, totally heartbroken, it hit me. I hadn't just moved countries. I'd actually left my whole career behind. I mean, when I arrived in Brazil, I really did have to start from zero. Not because I'd forgotten how to take photographs, but I didn't have a network anymore. I couldn't just ring up a stylist. I couldn't call a makeup artist. I didn't know any producers. I didn't know any agencies. Nobody knew who I was the important thing. And on top of that, I didn't speak any Portuguese, right? So something as simple as making a phone call was almost an impossible task. I mean, how do you organise a fashion shoot when you can't explain your idea, you can't direct the model? And on top of that, to make it even harder, I hadn't moved to Sao Paulo, which was obviously the fashion capital of Brazil. I'd moved to Belo Horizonte. So I wasn't starting again. I was starting again as a foreigner, as an outsider in a small market without the local language. Becoming a photographer still then wasn't even my biggest problem, really, was it? A bigger question was, how am I going to earn money? After a few months, I'm like, okay, so I've done nothing. I'm earning no money. I've got no income. How am I going to survive in Brazil? So luckily for me, I was a retoucher as well, which is post-production, which is Photoshop, all that stuff. So I got on the emails to some of the studios I knew back in London, and today working remotely is just totally normal. But back in 2013, it was something I had to work really hard to convince people to send me work while I was living in Brazil. I had to negotiate better rates with them because, like, look, I'm not here in the office. Can you send it all the way to Brazil and I'll work on it? Slowly, the work started coming in. And so there I was. I was living in my in-laws' house in Belo Horizonte, retouching fashion campaigns for studios in London. And it was a very, very strange life, very lonely. I was living in Brazil, working in England. The time difference helped me quite a lot. But the funny thing was, I didn't have a life outside of work. I lived with my in-laws, like I said. I didn't know anyone, didn't have any friends, didn't have any Brazilian friends, didn't go anywhere. So I just worked. Sometimes I'd book 2 freelance work days on the same day, and I'd work 16 hours a day for weeks on end. And just work. Not, I wasn't obsessed with work. I just literally didn't have anything else to do. And what else? What else was I going to do? How could a guy like me with no language skills get a job in a Brazilian company? It just doesn't happen. So at that time, I was earning pounds while living in Brazil, which felt incredible because compared to London, everything seemed affordable. So nice restaurants, weekend trips away, hotels, little luxuries like nice beers or nice meats. I could afford anything I wanted. I felt quite rich. So I just threw everything away. I stopped worrying about chasing my art photography career. I focused on just doing all this work, freelance, just making money and not caring. I was still having to pay all my tax in the UK. I was waiting for my CPF. I couldn't open a bank account in Brazil. I was in limbo. I was between 2 countries, which was pretty difficult. Everything was taking months. Eventually I made some friends. So I made some gringo friends and life became more social. And I just started going out, just forgetting everything, just spending money, drinking lots of beer, enjoying Brazil. But looking back, I was probably grieving still about missing my old career. I'd spent so much time being creative, creating a whole personality around being a photographer, and it just disappeared in the space of a year. It was no longer in my life. So that must have been 2 years of my life, living in my in-laws, working remotely with London, and being very, very isolated. And we eventually moved to Sao Paulo. And that's where another surprise happened. And it's another lesson in living in Brazil is I realised I'd been sitting on a career that I hadn't fully appreciated, which was the retouching, the Photoshop, post-production. I had my CPF, I had my Brazilian bank account. I was in Sao Paulo, so I started approaching Brazilian clients. And I had this portfolio of Vogue covers, of global advertising, Versace, Burberry, Dolce & Gabbana. Like, you couldn't get a bigger portfolio. You couldn't get bigger brands. You couldn't get more important work, celebrity covers for US Vogue. And I thought people would look at it and go, wow, great, let's work together. That's amazing. Instead, no one cared. And it was a really hard lesson. Okay, retouching here is treated more like a service, I guess. So if you're doing service jobs in Brazil, they tend to be lower paid, I think. And from my experience, they tend to be lower paid. And in the UK or in America, what I do as a service is actually considered a bit of an art. So you'd get paid loads. But I was intent on entering the Brazilian market. I wanted to live in this country, work in this country with Brazilian clients. And I wanted to succeed. I wanted to succeed in the country I was living in. I kept trying. And a Brazilian friend and I actually opened a retouching studio. And he was somebody who worked with me at Testino. So there was quite a bit of experience there. And we started to get some meetings. And eventually our first job as a company, we were invited to work on set for a magazine cover shoot with Anita. And at that time, I had zero idea who Anita was, and turned up on set and thought, wow, this is it, we've done it, we've cracked it. Finally breaking into the Brazilian fashion industry. Shoot went well, we did everything that was asked and more, and something felt off. And there was this feeling on set. So I don't know if this is real, but let me tell you the story anyway. It was like, who are these guys? Who's this gringo that's just suddenly appeared? When we asked questions, people weren't helping, people weren't welcoming. It just felt really, really odd on set. And then we got on another major shoot, and it was the same thing. It was just like silence. We were like, everyone was eating lunch together, and they were just kind of ignoring us. And so it really did feel like you don't deserve to be here. You haven't worked your way up. Who has just put you into this shoot? This is our area. This is our industry. How can you just come in and take some of the best jobs just like that? So I don't know if that's actually true, but it really felt like it. And then after that job, our emails were never answered again. It was like we didn't exist. And the Brazilian industry just did not want us. All that experience, all that work under pressure that we've proved ourselves over years went for nothing, absolutely nothing. And there was no explanation, no phone calls, no replies to emails. We chased up. It was odd. I don't know if anybody else has experienced anything like that. I stopped trying to work in Brazil then, and instead I realised something. It took a while to realise it. My advantage wasn't competing with the Brazilian studios. It wasn't about working in Brazil and trying to get all these clients. It was becoming a bridge with London and Brazil. And that's where my edge was. I had all the contacts there, and it would prove quite good. So I got some junior retouchers and I started training them up, all the standards that you would expect from a UK, a London or a New York studio. There's specific ways of working, specific ways of handling files. And some people would come in and they'd work for a week with me and they told me they were senior retouchers and their work was just not up to the standard that you would expect. And be like, hey, you told me you're charging me this much money and you said you're a senior retoucher and you're nowhere near the level that I expect of a senior retoucher. So look, I'll pay for the week, but just go. But our office grew. Our office kept growing. Our team grew, and our clients became bigger and bigger. And we were doing really well. But none of our clients were in Brazil. Just our team was. Our clients were in London, New York, Los Angeles, Japan. Totally global. Germany. Loads of clients from Germany. The talent was in Brazil, and so we became a bridge between the two worlds without planning it. I was dead set on working in Brazil, on creating a company in Brazil, but I just found it too difficult. So I haven't.